Hey everybody, you can hear me? Hey everybody, you can hear me? I can hear myself. There we go, turn that off. Alright, well today I thought it'd be fun to go over some of the new wireless topics in the CCNA and just kind of explore what is required for that. But first, just a little PSA that became aware of there. Cisco is doing a second free shot if you fail your ICN2 or composite exam. So you can register again with this promo code. More info on the subreddit. And if you need a second shot before February 23rd, you can use that to get a free one. Anyway, getting into it, I grabbed a copy of the exam topics in the new CCNA. And what we have here is your standard CCNA topics, and I went ahead and highlighted all the wireless topics I will be covering here. So the first thing in 1.1 we have explain controllers. We go into wireless principles. And here's where things get a little bit more fun there, because this exam is Tech MMOs, DNA centers, and network fundamental now? Yes, it is. But anyway, one of the interesting things I found when I was helping Todd Lamley write the CCNA book is that there's a lot of unpacking in this exam. So, for example, it seems like it's not that lot of topics there, but when you get to something like configure the components of the wireless LAN access for the client, such as WLAN creation, security settings, QoS, and advanced settings, that's potentially a lot of different things depending on how you read that topic there. So, for example, when I wrote the automation topic, I had to go on a lot about this here, and I actually had to write an entire chapter on Puppet, Chef, and Ansible, because there's just you can answer that in a question or a sentence or two, or you can write that in a 50-page chapter like I did, because there's what exactly is Puppet? Well, it's Python. You have to unpack it. So it'd be interesting to see when the actual exam comes out if like Odom and I and Lamley overshot the mark, or if we didn't cover enough, but we'll have to see how that goes. Anyway, so the wireless topics, they want you to compare the different wireless architectures. They want you to basically configure the interfaces, such as the APs and the trunk ports, and set up port channels. They want you to understand things like radius and TACX, and how to make a basic LAN with WPA2 with pre-share key. So before we get into it, I just wrote out a couple things on this page. So there are 5 main types of wireless controller options that we have. You have the autonomous AP, and this is your router with access point in it. You have a mobility controller, and what this is a controller that lives inside your switch. Then you have the WLC. This is what the CCNA is going to focus on. And you also have the 9800 controller. Now this one is more CCNP and CCIE. The way they wrote the topics, though, they don't explicitly say the 9800, but it is included in the equipment list for the CCIE. So I'm guessing, unless the topic explicitly says it's WLC for a wireless topic there, they also want you to know the 9800. And then Meraki is its own little thing, but it is included in a couple of the CCNP topics. And then before we get into it, we need to know how to actually join an AP, and this is what I'm talking about when I say unpacking, because when you set up your lab, the books are just going to cover how to set up a wireless network, but it's not going to explain how to actually join your APs for your lab and such. So there are two main options that we care about at this level. There is a DHCP option and a DNS option. When you do DHCP, you have to use hex code to tell the AP how to reach the controller. The type is F1, so it's always going to start with F1. And then the length is how many controllers you're using. So it's going to be 4 times the number of controllers. So if we have my controller of 10, 30, 11, 40, our MAC is so far is going to be F1, 04, because I just have one controller for this lab. And then what we need to do is convert the IP address to a MAC address. So we have 10, so that is going to be 0A. Then we have 30, which is going to be 1E. Yes, I know my writing is terrible. Then we have 11, which is going to be 0B. And then we have 40, which is going to be 28. By the way, if you need a refresher on how to do hex conversion, you basically just convert it to binary. So if I do, let's say, the last digit 40, that is going to be 0, 0, 1 for 32, 0, 1 for 8, which is 40, 0, 0, 0. And then all we do is we split this up into nibbles. So this is going to be 2, and then this is going to be 8. So 2/8 is how you get the value there. Everyone good with hex conversion? Okay, moving on. Then the next option is we just need to make a DNS record that points to Cisco CapWatt controller. And all we do is just make an A record that points to it. My tablet has an edge there apparently. Record. And pro tip there, you also need to make sure you're setting the domain name, which is option 15. Otherwise, it's just going to not know how to find your actual DNS record. So my record is testlab for the domain. I'll show you this when we actually configure it. testlab.com. Ooh, that looks terrible. Anyway, so let's get that out of the way, and we will just set this up on my network here. So in my lab, I have some Meraki switches because they're nice and quiet. And I actually already have this set up, so let's go here. So this is my DHCP. So what I was saying is we need the domain option. So I need code 15 and then my domain, so that it knows how to append the domain record if I'm using that method. And then if we're doing the the option 43 method, we set the hex code to what we just worked out there, the F104 and so on. Then from there, I just have a bunch of access ports or access points set up. So we have some 2700s here. We have some we have some 3600s, we have some 3500s, and we have some 3700s for my 900 controller. We also have a standalone one, but we probably won't be talking about that today. Just for fun, since we're here, if you ever see Meraki, you can just go ahead and create a SSID directly from the web interface. So if I wanted to, I could just go under SSID, I could pick a pre-share key, tell it the value, set the network settings, and off we go, nice and painless. But that's not going to help you pass the CCNA. What you need to do is go over to the WLC here. And I should have 2 access points, but I named them wrong. Not that it matters. Alright, so we got to work through a few options here. This is the WLC, and this is what you get when you log in. So we get a quick summary of things. So right now I have 2 access points joined for my lab. And we can see some SNMP trap information from the wireless. We can see some software snapshots. The wireless controller acts as basically an SDN controller. So when you join the access points to the controller, it's going to automatically upgrade the APs to the same version and handle all the configuration. So what we need to do is first go over to the controller. And if you remember our topics, one of the things it wanted you to know was the ports, like how to set up a port channel or a leg. So to do that, you go under controller, and then under leg, you enable it. This is going to go ahead and reboot your controller, so don't do this in production if you want to keep your job. And after that, all the interfaces are going to be placed into, I meant to click ports actually. All the ports that are active are going to be placed into a single port channel. And this is not going to be LACP, this is just going to be channel group on. So yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind there. There's no dynamic port channel on this platform. Once that's done, you need to create some interfaces. So the management is where we have our IP addresses for actually managing. So this DNS record is actually pointing to this IP. And in my case, I set this up as a trunk, so it's tagging as VLAN 311. And this checkbox here is what allows access points to actually register to this interface. So if I uncheck this, then I would have to create a new interface to home the access points to. From there, we have DHCP helpers if we want to have addresses set out. And nothing too interesting that we care about from a CCNA level. We go back to interfaces. We also have redundancy if we want to run a cluster. Service port is a special case, and this is for if you want to have a dedicated port for the WLC to send things like traps. You can do that. The quirk here is that there is no default gateway here. It's not a separate routing table. So what you need to do is actually add in static routes to your management network if you want to go ahead and use the service port for things. From there, we have a virtual interface, and this is what is used to redirect if guest authentication if you want to do a portal and you're not using something like Cisco ICE. Traditionally, this used to be 1.1.1.1, but a certain company decided they were going to start using that address as a DNS server. So the new one to use is 192.0.2.1. And then the last thing we have here is what we call dynamic interfaces. And what this lets you do is create basically a VLAN interface that we can terminate wireless to. So I'm just going to say VLAN 104, VLAN ID 104, and then we just get this IP information. So I'm just going to say 104.220. I think that's the speed. No, 40. I'll use 40. Basically, we give this an IP address. The WLC is not a router, so it's a layer 2 solution. So you're going to have your SVIs and stuff still on your core switches. It's a little bit different from like the 9800 there, but you typically won't do .1. And have the APs use this as a gateway because you're not going to be able to run OSPF or something directly with this box. So let's go ahead and say 104. We can do IP version 6 if we want. I do not want to. We can tell what the DHCP address is for the subnet if we want. And I think we can say OK. Now, I don't know if I actually have this in my Meraki, so let's go to my firewall. And I actually do have that already, so that worked out. So anyway, now we have a 104 interface that we can use for wireless. And we have our basic interfaces set up. We can also do things like make sure our NTP is working or our CDP for WLC. The next thing to worry about when we start building our wireless is the AAA. So as it happens, I need to add my AAA stuff into here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click New. And this is if you want to use an ICE server or something similar to do your authentication, which we'll probably get into as we do this. So we need to enter in a shared secret for our radius. We can go ahead and tell it that, hey, this is an ICE server, so apply your default settings. And basically what this is going to do for us is just enable support for change of authorization so that the ICE server can tell the WLC what authentication enacles the wireless user has rights to. So we'll just go ahead and say yes to that. And then we'll add my other one. Now the annoying thing here is that that's our authentication, our first A. We also have to do one for accounting. And my lab weirdly had that set up already, so I don't know why I had it halfway done, but here we are. So basically the same idea for accounting, except for there's no COA. And you can see it uses your 1813 for your port and 1812 for the other one by default. I'm not going to get into it, but you can also do TACX Plus here. And then if we get into guest wireless, we could talk about it, but you can have your ACLs on your WLC to control what the sessions have user or rights to. Alright, so what we need to do next is just make sure our actual access points are registered. So they are However, I got the name wrong, so I was going to correct that because that confused me earlier when I looked at it. But we have a name that we give it. We can give it a static IP address. We can tell it which DNS server to use. And the domain name, just like that. And then the main thing that we care about from a CCNA level is just the high availability. We want to make sure that it has the controller information saved to it there, just in case it doesn't always get its DHCP record in, so it can find it. And then we don't need to worry about anything advanced for right now, so we're just going to go ahead and click apply, and it's going to make those changes and possibly reboot the AV. And we'll just go ahead and hit like that. Alright, so now that our APs are the way I want it, the next thing to look at is under Advanced, under WLAN, and we have what's called an AP group. Can I get rid of these? Yep. We have an AP group, which is basically just a default group, what controls what WLANs are actually advertised. I'll be deleting this guy in a minute, but you can see we have our two APs in here by default, and then we can, if we wanted to have a WLAN advertised to just certain locations, we could make a different AP group to separate the two. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's get to the fun stuff. So click on WLAN. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And we can just go create new. So I'm going to call this WLC WPA PSK. So we have a profile name and an SSID. Most people tend to keep them the same thing just for convenience sake, but these don't have to match. And then you also have an ID, which is just how the WLC keeps track of the WLANs on the system. And depending on your platform, you can have up to 512 potential values, and then how many you can actually have depends on your unit size. So when we click apply, we get more options. So the first thing we want to do is enable it. If you don't check this, you don't get any wireless, so make sure you check it. Radio policy, we don't care for CCNA necessarily, but you can pick if you want wireless A, G, B, G, that kind of thing. I'm just going to leave it all. And then the interface is what controls what the wireless user subnet, or what subnet the wireless user gets put into. So I created WLAN 104. We can go ahead and select that. I didn't get into it, but you can also create an interface group, which is lets you have multiple interface or dynamic interfaces, and then the WLC will figure out which subnet to put it into there. So that's how you add new subnets into a wireless rather than having to re-IP everything. So pick 104, and we can choose whether or not we're going to broadcast the SSID. Generally speaking, you always want to broadcast your public stuff, and then your enterprise stuff you don't broadcast. Not so much for security, but because it just makes it easier if the user can't double-click a network if they're not registered for it. Alright, so click the security tab, and we start getting more options. So for this first example, we're just going to keep it simple. So we have layer 2 security, and you can see that we have WPA and WPA2. Newer controllers, what we'll see in the 9800, have WAPA3, but for the CCNA, it just wants WAPA2, so you just select that. And then you tell it which to use, so WAPA2 policy is checked by default, and it's going to want to use AES as encryption. You can go ahead and change this if you have a desire to. And then the next thing it does is ask you for the authentication method. So if we get into ICE tonight or later on, we'll go ahead and look at 802.1x, but for right now, we want PSK. And then it's going to go ahead and ask you what the format is. Or not the format, the key. So type it in. You'll notice there's no confirmation here or there, so make sure you type it right. And if we're happy with that, we can go ahead and click on the other tab. So this is if you want to use a portal. We'll look at that maybe a little bit later. But most of the time you're going to be using this with an ICE server, so we'll probably just look at the ICE version functionality of this. And then we have AAA, and this is how you point it to ICE in particular for the sessions, but we don't need to worry about that for right now. For QoS, there's potentially a lot here, and this is where the exam topics get a little bit murky, because all it says is such as QoS profiles. It doesn't tell you how far to go, it doesn't tell you how little to go, so use your own discretion there how much deep you want to go into this when you're labbing. But for the most part, we have 4 queues that are built in. We have a best effort queue, we have one that's made for voice, we have one for video, and bronze, which is more for background applications that we don't really care about. For most part, we can just leave it at silver. If we want to have application visibility, we can go ahead and do that, and the WLC will try and identify any applications it sees. Elsewhere in the other options, we can set up an AVC profile. Maybe I'll have a look at that later. NetFlow is a good way of getting information, so you can go ahead and set up NetFlow information. Fastlane you would need to get into in the CCNP stuff. We don't need to talk about that quite yet. And then basically you can override how fast you want particular traffic to go, and Cisco does have an agreement with Microsoft there for Skype for Business or a link quality of service, so you can go ahead and use that there for if you're doing wireless phone calls over with the WLC. Policy mapping we don't need to get into quite yet, but basically this is just how you can treat particular traffic. We'll have a look at it maybe a little bit later. And then advanced, we have a lot of options, and this is the kind of thing where you kind of get a little bit worried at the vagueness of the exam topics. But for the most part, for making this simple wireless work, we don't need to touch anything here. Some common ones are you can set it so that a DHCP address is required. So this means that the wireless will not work if you statically set an IP. You can have the WLC try and profile the traffic using DHCP and HTTP profiling. FlexConnect will do next there, just because it's in the CCNP, and it's frankly the easiest thing for you to lab, because this is a physical WLC controller, but most of you will be using the virtual WLC to study with, and that doesn't support local termination, so you have to use FlexConnect. So have a look at that next. And then we have just some things like Umbrella and link integrations and various wireless tuning. So anyway, we can go ahead and click Apply here. And at that point, we have a working LAN. So, or should have one anyway. So if I go ahead and open up my virtual machine. By the way, I just took a USB wireless adapter and connected it to there and shared it to my VMware workstation. So that's how a virtual machine can connect to wireless. It's a handy trick for a lab. Here it's here. Okay, so that works. So I should have something in that 104 subnet. 104, and I think I'm actually online. Geez, not the fastest thing in the world, was it? I immediately regret that decision. Oof. Anyway, I should be online here. And I am. Cool. So if we have a look at our WLC, we should see that we have one client connected, which it is. And from here I get a snapshot of various information. So I can see the IP address, I can see which AP we're using, I can see the QoS settings, the encryption if that's relevant to us, any ACLs that may apply, and so on and so forth. If I want to, I can go ahead and remove the client to kick it off. There's a prettier interface though, so if you just back out of this and log in again to go to the new dashboard, it gives you a much prettier page, and from here we can just go clients, and it gives us a much better or much more modern page where we can see the state of the authorization. You could see the fact that their CapWAP tunnel is working. The default mode for WLC is that there's going to be a encrypted CapWAP tunnel between the WLC and the AP to tunnel all the traffic. So it's going to automatically carry my traffic all the way over to where the WLC is. And if we want to see that, we can go ahead and go to my switch port here, and that is this guy here, details, and we can run a packet capture. We'll put this to Cloudshark and we'll say 60 seconds. That's running. Any questions so far? Never heard of Cloudshark before. What it is basically a wireless or a cloud-hosted Wireshark. So it's handy for doing things like this there, or sharing captures. So this should be done pretty quickly. I didn't see the last time I was in my Meraki. Is that new? Relatively new. I think it's been a couple years though. There it is. So if I click this, basically it's just a hosted Wireshark there. So this is handy because if I wanted to share this to you guys, whatever, I can just give you this URL and then you guys can look at this. So anyway, I can just filter on CapWAP. And we can see that the tunnel is here, so it's UDP 5246 is the port number. And this is the default mode of a physical WLC. When you lab, like if you download a virtual controller, it doesn't support this, so you have to use FlexNet, which we'll talk about next. And lastly, you can do things like ping tests, and you can do a packet capture here if you wanted to, that kind of stuff. Alright, so that's the bare basics of getting WLAN set up for a CCNA level. What do you guys think? Nifty, yes it is nifty. So the more relevant way for you guys to do this is to use a FlexConnect group. I should break things. I probably will break things. Just give me some time. So a FlexConnect is a way for the controller or the access point to locally switch the traffic. Because ordinarily what you get is something like this, where you have a branch office, and then it has its WLC here, and then maybe you have a DNVPN, and then you have your branch. Ooh, don't know why I drew a circle there. A branch, and then you have your APs. So with the CapWAP, all the traffic is tunneled directly to here. And this is handy because it lets you do central firewall. Because if you have your... I just left this pen color. If you have your firewall in the network here, then you just have one and all your wireless traffic is protected. With the FlexConnect, what you have is you have your switch and then your AP, and then there's an internet connection, say at the branch, and then maybe have your DNVPN. So from here, the traffic is just dumped to the switch, and then your routing table decides where you're going from here. So this has a lot more parts. So what you do is you can go ahead and create a group. We'll just call this Meow Flex Connect group. Then what you do is we go back to our WLC. Actually, I'll make a new one. So we'll call this WLC FlexConnect WPA. And make sure it's enabled. Go ahead and do PSK. Then under Advanced, what we want to do is we want to make sure local switching is enabled. And then we gotta start building this out here. So if we go back to the FlexNet group, we go to WLAN, we enable VLAN support, And we tell it what the native VLAN is for the port, so we're just going to go ahead and say, what is it, 320? 320 for my network. And then we have to tell it which VLAN ID is using what VLAN. So if I wanted to put things to 301 for a VLAN, oh, gotta hit apply first. Oh, I created a new VLAN. Well, he asked me to break things. So this is actually 2. There's no drop-down list. You have to remember the number. So the ID is important. So don't pick 4, 5, 6 or something. And then 301. So there we go. That's added. And from here we can do things like add in other VLANs that we can use when we start talking about ICE, and we can add in ACLs that need to be used. The control access point has to actually have everything loaded in memory beforehand because it's not talking to the controller anymore. So we'll look at that later on when we get deeper into that kind of stuff. So now that should be enough for basic tests, so we can go back to our guy here. What did I call that? It was Flex. There it is. Alright, so in this case I connected, but I didn't get an IP address. So let's just see what we have here. Go ahead and go back to our dashboard. And actually, I meant to click on so this case is actually decent troubleshooting because we see that we have our authentication, but we never got a DHCP address. So the first question is, do I have DHCP for that subnet? Which was 301 if I'm not mistaken. Oh, well, that's an easy one. There is no 301. So I meant to type 101 probably. So let's go back to wireless and then flex groups. And one step I actually forgot to do is under General, you click on FlexNet, go Add AP. And I actually forgot 2 steps now to think about it. Here's the troubleshooting you asked for. So what I actually forgot to do was if you go to the controller or access points, we have to change the mode from local to FlexConnect. Just like that. And then I need to add them properly into the AP group here. So that they're properly joined to the group there. Before it was in the default group there, so it was kind of working, but this is the proper way to do it. And then I need to go back to my WLAN, and my VLAN is actually 101, not 301. So let's give that another try. So I get the 101 VLAN. If I go back over to here, and go clients, you can see that is now FlexConnect, and everything else looks happy here. I don't know why my mouse has died. There it is. So, questions about that? Just to recap, because there's a bunch of moving parts here. You change the AP to be FlexConnect mode. You create a group, then you also, in your WLAN, you make sure that it's locally switched. I hit the wrong one here. It's this one. You make sure it's locally switched. Alright, we'll just wrap things up. The last method that's worth looking at is the 9800 controller. This is the new iOS version of the wireless controller. The other one is something called Air OS, and this is built on iOS XE. So it's a lot more pretty and it's a lot more modular. This is kind of similar to what you get if you log into an Aruba. So what I'll do is, just to make it a bit more easy, is we'll click on the Advanced button, and this gives us a nice little workflow of all the policies. So if I create one here, I'm just going to go ahead and call this 9800 WPA PSK. And we're going to make sure it's enabled. And then for security, we have WPA and WPA2 like before. If we want to, we can go ahead and do WPA3. Yeah, let's try it just for fun. Never actually tried this in my lab, so this could blow up on me. But we'll go ahead and pick PSK. And we'll type in a value and go apply. Now, because this is more modular, we now need to have a look at our profile. This is already set up for us, or I set this up rather, but we can see here that it's set up to use CapWAP because it's using central switching. If this was turned off, this would be FlexNet. And then we have our policies of what type of profiling is being done, what QoS. Mobility anchor I didn't really talk about, but this is a way of having a separate wireless controller in a DMZ and then sending all your wireless traffic to that controller. And then various other settings such as AAA for ICE and stuff. Anyway, what we do now is we go to a tag and we bind the WLAN or WLAN with the policy profile. So just like this, boom, boom, and apply. And then from here we have things like profiles on how APs should join the network, if they're doing Flex Connect or not, the RF profiles for the how things should connect. And then when you're done, you make sure that you apply the various tags to the AP so they're advertised. So at this point, we should be able to log in with the new one here and go connect. Guest SSID. Windows does not put this in alphabetical order, unfortunately. Don't see it. WLC, guest. Did I miss something here? Always something in the lab. Okay. Your enable audio broadcasting. Oh, I wonder if it doesn't support. Don't think my virtual machine support or my adapter likes WPA3, so let's put this to PSK. Methodical, never used 9000 before, looks so clean. Yeah, it is actually a lot nicer, and it's actually a full router. So if I connect to my but it's actually a full router, so it can do OSPF. If you want to do BGP or ISIS, you can. If you want to do a DMVPN, you can go ahead and do that. Like, it's very flexible in that regard, and the CLI is actually what you would expect from Cisco rather than the other controller, which is a completely different operating system and logic. So much better in that regard. So anyway, I think that's probably my issue here. If I try and connect again. Yeah, so apparently either my wireless adapter or my Windows 10 doesn't like WPA3. Anyway, we'll go ahead and connect. Just start this up. So you can see there, I am, this is CapWap again. I'm going back to the tunnel. If I look at monitoring and then clients, get a bit more cleaner information once it figures things out, so you can see things like it's identified as Microsoft Workstation, gives you general information about what's going on. And so on and so forth. So that's basically the non-ICE part of ICE, or the non-ICE part of basic wireless. The main difference with the ICE there is that you define the radius like we did earlier, and then what we would do is, if we wanted to make a simple guest wireless, we could do this. So we'll go WLC guest SSID. Then the main difference here is what you would do is, well, obviously enable it, and then tell it where you want to terminate. So I'm just going to pick 101. Then under security, we want to pick none, because ICE is going to be our security, and we want to be able to bring up a captive portal. And then we enable MAC filtering, which is going to send the initial MAC address to of the client to ICE there for to start the authentication process. If we go to AAA, Cisco gives us this handy ICE default, which is just going to set some options for us. And then we can just pick the ICE service we care about, just like that. And it's going to enable for authentication, authorization, and accounting. Then the other main difference is under advanced, we want to make sure that allow AAA override is on. This is generally a good idea to enforce a DHCP address. For profiling, or for the NAC state, this is, if you remember what I mentioned about the change of authorization, this is what allows ICE to send that authorization. So if you have issues where ICE isn't communicating properly with the WLC, you forgot to enable the NAC state for ICE. And then if we go down to radius, we want to make sure these are checked. It's already checked because I hit the default option, or the ICE defaults there. And then the rest are basically just optional stuff that we don't really care about. We're not going to go too down the advanced route here. So anyway, now we have this. We can go ahead and look at my ICE server. Yes, I network check guy. So just a quick rundown of ICE. We're going way beyond what a CCNA needs, but hey, we're here. So the first thing you want to do is just make sure that your WLC is defined. If you don't match this there, it's not going to match its handshake, and you want to make sure the radius is matching there. They do give you a nice little show option. So there's my AAA key. Please don't hack me, guys. You can also do TACX and SNMP, but let's not get too in the weeds. So I already have a lot of the profile stuff set up here. Basic logic is that when the radius comes in, it's going to be looking for a radius packet from the label WLC from that group or that page I just showed you, and the SSID is going to contain guest. I don't know if I actually named it that. I did. Okay. Then all we do is we would define our policy, and there's basically two main rules here. We want to have... No, I don't need BYOD. You can get rid of that. So we want to have it so that when the packet comes in, they are authenticated. But since it's a guest user, they're not going to be on their network. So what you want to do is just have ICE say, if I don't know who you are, that's fine, continue. And then we have a row up top that basically says, if they are authenticated, go ahead and let them in. And this is something called MAB, where the MAC address is saved by the ICE server. And then we have to have a redirection thing there. So first I got to fix this name. And then we just got to edit this so that this is going to be whatever I said here. Just like so, and I believe I made a port already. Hopefully this is actually working. Alright, so basic theory here is that if it doesn't know who it is, it's going to send to a portal to register the user, and if it does know who it is, it's just going to let on the network. So let's see what actually happens here. This is a completely an impulsive whim, so this could be a troubleshooting section real quick. And you know what I realized is I probably tested this out earlier, and it already knows about it. So I should be actually online here. Which is fine, we can wipe it out. So what we'll do is we will go to endpoints, which is where ICE tracks all the endpoints. And I'm going to cause an outage just by deleting everything that ICE knows. Don't do this at home. go kill this guy. So now ICE knows nothing about it. I'll just make sure it's nice and clean. Okay. Alright, so this time if I disconnect and reconnect, it should know this MAC address. And you know what, guys? My ICE setup is so functional, I can't even have it deny. Let me just see here. Oh, that's why I never actually configured this. This is why you should look at things before you start going down a path when you're streaming to people. So basically what's happening here is that this is what's called authorization profile, and this tells ICE how to treat the traffic. Right now it's just saying accepted onto the network. So what I want to do for our purpose is we want to go to web redirection. And we need to put this to guest portal, which is a portal I already made. And we need something called a redirection ACL. I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but hey, it's fun, right? If we go to security, and then we go to access control lists, I have two ACLs here. I have ACL web redirect and guest access. So if we look at web redirect, what this is saying is that traffic that's permitted is allowed. Anything that's denied is going to be redirected to the ICE server. So what's allowed is the ICE portal. If you don't do this, you're going to cause a loop where it just keeps trying to redirect endlessly. I'm going to allow DNS traffic so that we don't cause any issues, and we're going to allow DHCP. Otherwise, all outbound traffic is allowed, but inbound traffic is going to be denied. So we just grab this guy. Just like so. And since we're already in this, let's just look at the portal. And basically what this is a fancy workflow that decides who's allowed to use your network or not. And we can walk through all that there, but I'll talk about this later on when we get into more advanced topics if this keeps up. But anyway, we should be able to go to our logs here, and I should be able to log in again. The great trinket. So ICE refers to ACL defined on WLC by name. Yes, that's actually one of the benefits of the 9800 is you can use what's called a downloadable ACL or a DACL, and you can push the ACL directly from the ICE server because it's a iOS XE platform, so that's a lot better for everyone involved. So what we can do is just register for guest access. This is the standard portal. And we'll just call this Duck01. Go ahead and give me a password, so we're going to sign on. And let me just make sure that I wasn't doing something untoward. 1 second. I just want to make sure what the okay, success page get. I do some really strange use case testing there, and I just want to make sure it's not going to send to a page that's going to ban me from Twitch or something. Anyway, we can just go ahead and click accept and continue. All right, so at this point, I should be online. And it redirected me again. And we're still hitting the rules. So if I go to my policy here, my name doesn't match my SSID. So now I should be online. But anyway, that's the basics of what you would need for the CCNA and a bit of the CCNP level stuff. You can see that just by the icon I'm allowed there because it's showing the signal instead of the little world sign. So now I should be able to go to Google there and search for, I don't know, more Cisco. We'll see if anyone else take my catchphrase. Cisco, fair enough. Alright, so that's basically that. So just to recap, we kind of point out the exam topics of what wireless is on there. If I do this next, I'll probably focus on the DNA Center stuff, just because that's a potentially interesting and important part of the CCNA. And then after that, I'll probably just close out with some automation things throughout the week. Beyond that, we talked about the different controller types briefly. We talked about how to do the discovery method. And then we just made a few wirelesses. Any questions, thoughts, concerns, fears? How often do you do this, man? Well, actually, I haven't done this for like a year and a half. I'm thinking of probably getting back into it there. I've been kind of busy writing some books with Todd Lamley and making some video courses, but I figure now's the time to start just kind of easing back into making more streaming content, and I'll probably start taking these videos and throwing them on my YouTube to try and grow that a bit, so on and so forth. Duck, yeah, can we load this as a virtual machine or something into Viro JNS3? Yep, so this is why I went into the Flex Connect. So if we open up Cisco, you can download, is it virtual they call it? Yeah, virtual LAN control. I got it exactly backwards. There we go. You can download the controller and it will work just as well. The only thing it won't do is the cap-up tunnel, so that's why I just made sure you guys know how to actually do it. If you so if you download it, you have to make sure that the version you download supports the APs, because chances are you guys in the lab are using older APs. So you want to make sure that you're sticking around 8.5 or so. If you look at the release notes for each version, it will tell you which APs are supported. But beyond that, you can download it. There's a couple quirks. If I do, or I might quickly just do a stream later on this week or so to show you how to make a virtual WLC, because there is a couple different quirks in it, but it's basically the same as what I showed you. How do you like the Chromium Edge? Actually, I use this because one of my big expertise is Cisco ICE, and some of the tabs only work well with Microsoft Edge, just the funs of the browser Edge. So, for example, if I was to go to external identity sources and then click on my Active Directory, this usually messes up if you're using like Chrome or Firefox, so I find Edge is the most consistently reliable. From Edge to Chromium Edge, I haven't really thought about it, but so far so good. Hasn't really failed me or anything. Any other questions before I go? All right, well, I'll probably do this again. Maybe on the weekend I'll break out the DNA Center lab and we can have a look at that, just to hash out the new topics, and then maybe we'll start getting into some of the automation stuff. But basically my game plan, without really thinking into it or thinking much about it, is I was basically just going to go through and talk about the interesting stuff that a lot of people aren't really thinking about yet. And then I'll probably just branch out into the CCNP and CCIE stuff, depending on where the conversation goes. But, alright guys, I'm going to find myself some rum, and talk to you later. Oh, shout out to Pete, by the way. He requested that specifically.